I do what I do today because of all the obstacles I had to overcome. Family obstacles, money obstacles, health obstacles. I wasn't born naturally talented. My walls, obstacles, and frustrations motivated me to find answers. Like the quote, necessity is the mother of all invention. Great things do not occur without a great sense of urgency. So our gym is full of knowledge, however, we don't just spew it out as it is shortly lost. We create an environment where you can learn by doing and feeling. Then as you progress, better questions present themselves through your experience, which give rise to greater levels of achievement as you break through barriers. It's not for everyone. The main point of our gym is to fail. It's a safe environment to do so, but without failure, you can't learn. When people experience success, there is no stimulus to want to change anything. But if you fail, there's a reason to learn and improve. If you continually fail at the same point, you are not learning, of course. That's why we are here, to guide you and set up parameters for failing appropriately. But once you learn from failure and succeed, we celebrate momentarily and then get back to work, overcoming the next level of failure. This is not a place where everyone gets a trophy. It's honest. It's raw. Many people don't like that because it requires a good look into the mirror and a test of your mental and emotional fortitude. Many don't like the challenge, but if you want to really make something of yourself, steward all that God gave you, it's the means necessary to do so. We enjoy this training environment because the habits formed here transcend into all areas of life. And as a side benefit, you get to be really strong and fit in the process. Here's to real learning. Welcome back to the 127 Fit Podcast. Today's guest is Christopher Knott. Christopher Knott is a husband, dad, coach, trainer, and entrepreneur. He's the owner of Dunamis Accelerated Recovery and Performance in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Chris, welcome to the 127 Fit Podcast, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to sit down and chat with me for a few minutes. So
absolutely, glad to be here.
So, Chris, really quick, I just kind of want to start with a little bit in regards to failure. That's kind of a little bit of that excerpt that I just read from one of your blogs. And so the question I have for you, and if you just kind of want to share your thoughts and your heart and expound a little bit on it, is why is failure so important for human growth?
Well, the short answer is we really don't learn from success, we learn from failure. If you did everything well, there'd be no need to keep on going. And unfortunately, when people tend to set goals, if you could achieve those goals and you had nothing else to go after, you would remain complacent. And we also say here that there's no such thing as really maintaining, whether you're talking about your physical health, financial, business, whatever. You're either growing, getting better, or you're digressing, getting worse. So failure is that thing that says, okay, something has to change, something has to get better, something has to improve. And it's typically through failure that you create that sense of urgency that then propels you, gives you the motivation, gives you the drive, the desire to find solutions, find that next thing, find that breakthrough. So yeah, that's why we really look at and force the environment of failure so that we can be real with ourselves, with our environment, and actually become better, become real stewards of what we have, and not just sit back hoping for mediocrity.
Right. Now, like in a gym environment, how do you come to that place of failure? I mean, because you don't want somebody to fail per se, like in a movement pattern or something like that, because that would create a bad pattern, correct? So kind of in your environment, in your gym, how do you challenge the kids or whoever you're training in regards to failure?
Yeah, so failure can take on multiple forms. Again, we use an acronym here: PIPES: physiology, intellect, psychology, emotion, and spirit. We would say that those are the 5 components of the human being, and if you're not engaging all of those 5 components in whatever endeavor you're working towards, it doesn't have to be in a gym setting. This could be in your business, it could be in your home life, as a parent, as a spouse, but bringing everything you have to the table is how you're going to be the fullest you possible. So we'll set up a lot of exercises that will elicit a more of a mental or a psychological challenge, for example. A lot of people will quit well before they're physically capable of quitting. Or, as you mentioned, that inability to, let's say, maintain proper position within a lift. A lot of the times it's not because you're not physically able to. It might be a lack of concentration. It might be a lack of discipline to perhaps get in the right position to set up correctly. What is your breathing like? Where's your head position, your eye position? Are you engaging muscles before you even ever pick up the bar, right? Are you visualizing the lift ahead of time? I mean, there's so many details that can go into being truly excellent at even just training. Those are the things that make the difference between just, hey, my coach told me to do 3 sets of 10 on the bench press, and if you just try to do what was given to you, again, it's human nature to want to succeed. So even the idea of choosing an appropriate weight, if I just wrote a program and said do 3 sets of 10, 98% of the people are going to pick weights that they achieve, as opposed to challenge themselves with weights that get to the point of failure. Now, you can also fail in the lift without breaking position, without breaking form, and get to a true physiological point of failure, and that's okay. But if you're doing more higher volume, higher endurance reps, most people tend to have at least 2 more reps than what they do when they actually stop, if you allow them to have those parameters. So yes, our program is much more involved as far as when are our cutoff points. Obviously, we are very big stricklers on maintaining proper position for the development of motor pattern. We tend to specialize in neurological-based therapy and training. So motor patterns and doing things correctly and building on those foundations are paramount within the program. But again, the failure components are much more. Another way that is exemplified in our training philosophies is that we're always going to work on your weaknesses. So most people tend to go to the gym and do the exercises that they are already proficient at because they feel good, right? If you're really good at bench press but hate squats, you're going to really push hard on bench press day, and you're going to just do the minimum amount required on squat day, or shy away from it, or again, not really focus on what you need. Another hard part is when people need to learn that correct motor pattern, but egos get in the way, so they want to push more weight than what they're prepared for. Just because you can put the weight on the bar and maybe you can make it down and up in the squat doesn't mean that actually helped you or it's beneficial to, let's say, athletic performance. Right. That's why we have a lot of people who would say, oh, I got stronger in the weight room, but I can't run faster, can't jump higher. And that's because the motor pattern didn't translate over into other human movements that would translate to actual sport development.
Right.
But just because you put more weight on the bar, a common example, everyone wants to talk about being quad dominant, right? If you have no hamstrings, if you have no glute activation, if your spine is weak, if you put that weight on your back now and go down, the only way to get back up is to alter your weight, shift your center of gravity, push with those quads, because, okay, that's the one thing I know how to do. So guess what? Your quads are actually overloaded now, so they're going to get stronger, which means you can even put more weight on the bar.
Right.
But your deficiencies, where you're weak, where you're going to fail in essence, just got even weaker.
Right.
So we tend to always find those fun and creative and really annoying exercises that really push your weaknesses, so that you can get better. There's 1,000 analogies, right? Of course, the chain breaks at the weakest link,
yep.
Right? It's a very common one. So within that total body movement, because again, you don't isolate muscles, that's why kind of the American traditional mindset has so much underlying principles of bodybuilding, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, muscle isolation. So we even get a lot of our physical therapy. It's, oh, that rotator cuff is weak. Let's try to isolate the rotator cuff. But tell me how that rotator cuff is isolated when you're throwing a 95 per hour fastball, right? So we have to have a more broad sense of how the human body works together. However, we can place it in positions that emphasize, again, where you're going to fail, where that weakest link is, and then that takes the discipline to actually concentrate, to actually do what you need to do to work on that weakness. So we're always pushing the envelope of failure, and within that is already built in the psychological, the emotional, the discipline, the concentration, and really the sense of urgency of how good do you want to be. When people walk in and they're injured, I sprained my ankle, I hurt my knee, they're so used to being in an environment of just fix my ankle. Oh, I feel better, so now I get to go back to my sport. And really what's happening is they're going back to the exact same things that led them to the injury in the first place, not really addressing the totality of how to be a complete human being, to be a complete athlete. And that's why we have 70% of our medical world is what? Pharmaceutical drugs.
Right.
Let's mask the symptom, let's mask the pain so that I can feel better. And then now we've got this whole dichotomy of if I'm in pain, I must need therapy. But if I'm not in pain, I get to go train. Or better, even worse yet, however you want to look at it, I just get to go play my sport, which is really skill acquisition. Going out and shooting free throws is not training. That's just getting better at a particular skill.
Right.
Any sport done repeatedly is going to create imbalance. It's going to create a breakdown, right? It's like driving a car that has bad alignment. Eventually, you're going to wear the tire down inappropriately, and now that tire can't absorb the pothole, so now the pothole blows the tire, and everyone gets out of the car and screams at the pothole when they haven't been taking care of all the things in the first place. So now, I mean, you can see that this conversation can go into 1,000 different directions on what really constitutes performance, health, longevity, your potential. And that's why, again, everyone kind of has their, we'll call it their thermostat, right? Their comfort zone of, okay, if it gets a little too cold, I'll warm it up a little bit, but I don't want it too hot, right? It's the same reason financially. Hey, I made a little extra money this month, we'll go out to dinner more often, right? As opposed to saving that and getting ahead, right? We don't have quite that discipline, but it's like, oh, now the bank account's a little low, so let's tighten the bootstraps until we have enough of where we feel comfortable, and working all the way literally to professional athletes. It's one of the biggest struggles that I have is when I'm called by a professional athlete, it's usually because they have an injury, right? If they weren't injured, I would never get the call because without the injury, again, without that sense of urgency, they just kind of assume, hey, what I'm doing must be working because I, quote unquote, feel good. Now I'm injured. Well, now I got to get back. Now I have this sense of urgency. Well, I got to find the guy who heals people fast, so I'll call up Chris, and they want me to be the fix-it guy. So I quickly then get in this conversation of, to be honest, I really don't want to work with individuals that just want a Band-Aid. How good do you really want to be? Just because you are in the NFL, if you're a Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, whatever, are you still anywhere close to your God-given potential? Probably not. How can we actually get better? What does it take? Let's dream a little bigger. Let's have a little bit, as opposed to this mentality of it's good enough. You know what? I'm already on the team. We're already going to the playoffs. I'm feeling okay. You know what, that's good enough. So I'm going to take the rest of my time. I'm going to party on the weekend. I'm going to do whatever. Like, no, that's not the kind of people we like to work with. We want people that really want to look back at their stewardship of their potential, and so they can really say, I gave it my all. You know, and that's why it's no longer external. Did I win? Did I lose? What did the scoreboard say? It's more about how much more could I have done today? And if you can say, you know what, for the best of my knowledge, for the best of my ability, I did as much as I could do today, then we help people say, all right, now it's time to let the rest go. Go to bed, go to sleep, sleep peacefully, because that's all you could do. That was the only thing that was in your control. Tomorrow's a new day. Now we create our new sense of urgency, we get better, and we go forward. I think the most haunting things, though, are for people that look back on their life and say, I wish. I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have worked harder. I wish I could have done this, avoided that injury. You know, could I have gotten the scholarship? Could I have gone to the next level? Could I have gotten that grade? Could I have fill in the blank? Those are the questions that haunt people. Right? So that's what we're about, really, to be honest. My story of growing up in the traditional American bigger, faster, stronger, meathead, weightlifting, not knowing what we were doing, just harder is better, more is better. That's what led to my imbalances, led to my injuries, ultimately led to the end of my personal sporting career. And that haunted me. I was fortunate that after my baseball career was ending, I continued in strength and conditioning to train athletes. Was able to do strength and conditioning for the Colorado Rockies. At that time, I traveled through the minor league system, so I was able to throw a batting practice to the single A guys, the double A guys, the triple A guys. And I realized there was a distinct level where I was like, single A and double A guys, I could throw to those guys. I could actually strike a few of them out and say, like, I could actually play at this level. As soon as you get to like triple A, all of a sudden you realize there's a big jump in ability. And I realized, okay, you know what? I don't think I ever, even at my healthiest, possessed that ability, which was therapeutic for me because I'm kind of an all-or-nothing guy. And it allowed me to put that dream to rest. Or I should say the haunting question, what if? If I could have trained correctly, if I could have avoided some of those injuries, could I have gone further? Could I have gone all the way? So that was kind of God's provision for me so that I could move forward and realize that if it weren't for my injuries, if it weren't for all the things that happened to me in high school and in college, and then even after, because I've always been hard on my body, all the injuries that I had to learn how to fix that traditional medicine wanted to either cut me up with surgery or give me pills for that didn't work, I had to find a solution on how to restore my health. And because of that journey, because of those heartaches, again, going back full circle now to failure, because of my failures and having a sense of urgency to say, I don't want to be in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and feel like I'm decrepit all the time. When I left college in my 20s, I felt like I was 80. Now I'm in my 40s and I can do more than I could do in my 20s. So that was my sense of urgency first and foremost for my own health to say, how do I live? I still want to be doing, I want to have a 500-pound deadlift when I'm 80 years old. I want to be able to go sprint with my NFL guys well into my 50s. So those are just some personal visions for myself that I want to have, let alone I want to be able to play with my grandkids and those types of things. And the fact that we live in a beautiful state like Colorado, we have a lot of stuff to enjoy.
For sure.
I had to create a way of getting healthy. And now the people that we get to serve benefit from my process, from that sense of urgency. And we want to perpetuate that. And we want other people to not have to ask those haunting questions. I want our high school kids, whether they get that scholarship, whether they make it to the whatever level, again, it's no longer external, because there's always somebody that might be better than you. There might be a day where if I'm in a team sport, doesn't matter, you could have the best game of your life and the team can still lose. If you can learn how to let go of the things that you don't have control over, but you can at least steward what you do have control over, you can at least go to bed peacefully at night. And so that's kind of our initial motivation, and really the mission of Dynamis was, we wanted to open up a gym in our community here to pour back in our community and give the same opportunities that I give professional athletes to our kids and try to do it at an affordable cost. That was the original kind of mission statement of why we opened up our doors, and it's just kind of proliferated from there.
So you went to college, you played college baseball, correct?
Yeah, I was so I was a 3-sport athlete growing up: football, baseball, wrestling. Ended up going to Purdue University. When I actually had my first serious injury in high school, that was a dislocated shoulder, and I was a pitcher. So any opportunity of having a full, and again, I'm an all-or-nothing guy, so I had plenty of offers for D2, D3 schools, but I wanted to go to a D1 school, both for the experience, the education, and everything. And so I already knew I was going to go to a larger school. So I ended up walking on and was a walk-on, and then but was continually plagued with shoulder injuries, and so I ended up really on the IR for the most of the time. I had a stint too that was kind of fun. My roommate was on the varsity cheerleading squad. And while I was rehabbing my shoulder, he was like, "Hey man, you should go out for the cheerleading team, it'd be fun." I was like, "Well, I thought it'd be cool to do flips and hold girls up in the air with one hand." So actually did that on the side for a while. He taught me how to do a backflip and handsprings, and I
Cool.
some
Did you get a scholarship then for that?
I did actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a bad deal at all. Then.
Yeah, so we did that as well. So I had a little bit of baseball at the D1 level, as well as cheerleading,
Cool.
kind of on the side. So we did both at different times, and then continued in strength and conditioning after that.
So your undergraduate then, was that like in kinesiology, exercise science, or something like that, or?
Yeah. So what was funny is that we didn't really have great counselors in high school. I didn't even know that a degree in kinesiology
Right.
existed. So I knew my junior year of high school that I wanted to own my own gym someday.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, to have a gym, you got to have a lot of money. I was like, what am I good at? Well, I was good at math, was good at computers. So I actually enrolled in and got accepted in Purdue in computer science.
Okay.
And when I got there, I was in the middle of all the kind of the pre-exam or pre-placement tests, and met with my counselor for the first time, who's, tell me about yourself, and told her my dreams and aspirations. She's like, well, why are you in computers?
Right.
And she told me about this field, kinesiology, and I was like, oh, that sounds good. So didn't make a lot of sense to make a lot of money and then someday just buy a gym.
Right.
So that's when I switched over, and I had a double major in movement. It was a movement and sports science, and then another in exercise and fitness. And then it was about my sophomore year, I realized that education really wasn't enough for what I wanted. So at the time, I thought the athletic trainers were getting really the best education when it came to anatomy and that.
Right.
So again, being an athlete, it was fortunate. I knew all of the head professors
Right, yep.
in athletic training. So I approached them and said, hey, I know I'm too far behind to actually do all the clinical side. Plus, I was an athlete, so I didn't have the time to do all the clinical work. But I still wanted the education, so I ended up getting the equivalent of a minor in athletic training because they accepted me into that program as well. So really, in my undergraduate, movement, sports science, exercise and fitness, and then athletic training. And then I stayed on as a graduate assistant, and got my master's in exercise physiology and another in sports management.
Cool.
And then again, did strength and conditioning for Purdue for a while.
Okay.
And then from there came to Colorado, to the Rockies.
Cool.
And then after that, we settled here in Colorado Springs.
Okay. So if somebody, I have somebody that I went to high school with and actually went to college with, and he's at Washington State right now as an assistant strength and conditioning coach. So I've seen kind of through his process just all the bouncing around. He was in the SEC for a while, and just living on somebody's couch. Just kind of that grind of a strength and conditioning coach. Is that something that you kind of experiences as well? And what kind of is the process if somebody wants to get into that strength and conditioning, working with athletes on teams? Because I also know kind of like where you're at right now, then there's also the private sector, and there's kind of maybe two different routes you can take, or maybe it's the same route. Do you want to maybe share a little bit about that? Maybe your experience and knowledge?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, most everything, understand. Let's say if a listener is, hey, I want to be a strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos.
Right.
Realize there's only 32 head strength and conditioning coaches in the nation.
Yep.
All right. So therefore, if you're going to get into any of those jobs, same thing. Obviously you got your professional teams, which is a limited number. At your top D1 programs, again, limited number.
Yep.
So strength and conditioning is a relatively tight world, and the only way to really get your job is still word of mouth. You have to have someone that helps you get that leg up and opens the door.
Right.
Okay, so that when the door opens, you're next in line. Now, how do you get that? You can get the initial doors open, and I would say the first thing is two major ways is through the universities, right? Become that graduate assistant. So you have to fight for that graduate assistant.
Right.
And it started, I was, being an athlete, I was already in the weight rooms. But then on top of that, even my later years when I was no longer in the collegiate athletic realm, I didn't stop. I was still in those weight rooms. I was still volunteering. I always made my presence known. And that's one of the things I think is really missing today. Now, like some of these programs, internships are they're a part of the requirement where
Right.
we didn't really have required internships. So it was really, in one sense, it was almost better because it was the actual people that took the initiative and stuck their neck out there were the ones that actually got the opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like what's the quote? It's like, luck tends to favor those who work harder.
Yeah.
So you have to get out there and you have to get experience, because the head knowledge and really what you learn in school, sorry to say, it's pretty much a joke.
Mm-hmm.
It's enough to give you maybe a rudimentary foundation, and college teaches you how to learn, which that is the invaluable skill, and to complete. So if someone's like, hey, do you really need a college degree to go and be great? No, not at all. However, college degrees do say, well, you were able to start something and finish. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you now learn how to teach yourself. And I think that actually happens better in graduate school than undergrad. But we also have this shift in our education where more people are in this American, knowledge of regurgitation. It's here's the information, memorize it, take your test. If you can memorize it well enough to remember it on a test, you can pass and get a good grade.
Right.
And that somehow makes you qualified.
Right.
I just had, we do sponsor internships here. We work with a couple different certifying bodies. And the thing is, though, is that when they come here, when I answer the email that says, hey, we have a new person, can you interview them? And I say, sure. They just think, oh, it's a formality. Well, no, I just turned out another intern last week.
Right.
Great kid, nothing wrong with the kid.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have the critical thinking skills.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have, bottom line is experience. Like, here's a simple one. If you knew that you were going to come here for an internship because your program set it up, if you hadn't even taken the time to get on the webpage to even see what we do, and I asked that, if I'm like, so give me an idea of how much do you know about what we do?
Right.
And if you're like deer in headlights, you're already done,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It just shows kind of the lack of initiation of
Right.
and same thing, if I ask questions, I'll ask questions more about not just can you tell me like, hey, can you memorize this?
Right.
Yes, you have to have a basics of, you need to know the difference between a tendon and a ligament.
Mm-hmm.
We literally had someone here one time that could not tell me the difference between a tendon and a ligament.
Right.
That's pretty sad. But when you can't process, like, all right, here's an example. How do I take the application of the example and apply it over here in this other thing to create an answer or solution, right? That becomes a problem. If you don't have just people skills, if you don't know how to even communicate, look somebody in the eye,
Right.
be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Or then it's like, if you want to be in the training world, how are your workouts going?
Right.
What kind of questions? Are you just doing what you saw in a muscle and fitness magazine?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you saying, all right, how do I get better today? How do I improve on, if you want to be in training and conditioning, how are you getting stronger?
Exactly.
How are you getting faster?
Being
how are
that
you getting
example.
healthier?
Mm-hmm.
And one of my top questions that I ask my interns is, tell me what you think is wrong in our industry. What do you think is wrong in our education? What do you think is wrong in training right now as you see it? Because if they can't even answer that, they're not asking good questions. And again, it goes back to that concept of failure. Even here, every day, I'm like, what can we do better?
Exactly.
What do I not know? So when it comes to serving others, which that's our profession, we're here to serve others. If that person fails in my care, it's not because of what I do well, it's because of what I didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have to be asking those kinds of questions. But getting a little off topic of the initial question, so you have to put yourself out there, you have to be doing it to even get noticed, not just what are your grades, because nowadays, anyone can get grades.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to be there? Are you the guy that they see, oh yeah, that dude's busting his butt every day. Oh, he's a hard worker. He's showing up before everyone else. He's willing to put his weights away. He's willing to clean up after others. You're showing a servant heart. You're showing all of those things that are getting less and less, unfortunately, in our society. So you do get that opportunity. You get that graduate assistant position. Now, if a position opens up, now you can become an actual paid assistant. Paid assistants do a good job, can move to head positions, or you get noticed by the coach. So like say a football coach, new football coach comes in, he says, that guy did a really great job for me. He wants to bring you along. That's how you get more of the D1 positions. And similarly, most of the people that end up in the NFL strength and conditioning positions, they work for the guy who is already in that position, because a lot of us think that's what I did with the Rockies, right? I had to present myself. I wanted to be in Colorado, so I applied to different teams at the time because of my baseball background. I wanted to start in baseball.
Right.
But I wanted to be in Colorado, and that was one of the teams that also had accepted me. But it was, I didn't make peanuts,
Right.
my first year.
Yeah.
So you have to jump in on that, and you have to do a good job, and you get those opportunities. Now, there are some more prestigious training facilities in the country. That's another route. So not the current, but the previous strength coach for the Broncos, his whole staff were guys that he hired that were interns and worked with him from the training environment that he was at prior.
Okay.
And he got his foot in the door because of, again, a lot of the athletes who train there in the off season. And again, there's a small world of who you know, but yeah, you get your shot, and you have to be. There are great trainers that are out there that no one will ever know their name because they just never got their shot.
Right.
And that happens. So you definitely have to have your backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when I got done with the Rockies, I kind of was done with athletes for a while, at least at that level. I came here to Colorado Springs. I actually had an offer. I could have gone strength and conditioning for the Olympic Training Center at the time. But just so people can understand, this is back in 2001, 2002. Training Center was not at all where it is at today. Back in that, it was not even the equivalent of a decent Division I college program. It was pretty pathetic, actually.
Really? The Olympic Training Center?
The Olympic Training
Wow.
Center. Now, strength and conditioning. Now, their exercise phys lab was pretty awesome, even back then. Strength and conditioning was a joke. So I was just like, you know what? I didn't want to go back. I was actually kind of appalled because even like Purdue University's weight room was, this didn't even come close to comparing. It felt like a junior high weight room compared to a normal D1 college. Again, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or almost 20 years ago. So didn't want to do that. And again, just was kind of fed up with the egos and the athletes, and plus the political and my person. I don't work well under people.
Right.
So that's where I was at a crossroads. I'm not going to go work at a 24-hour fitness with my experience.
Right.
I didn't want to go back into professional world, or at least not then. So that's when I was like, okay, I'll do my thing on the side. So I just kind of started my own private. I literally started with a $3,000 loan. Bought 3 pieces of equipment, started in my basement, and started training privately, and still continue with some of my contacts. And that led to other professional athletes, and could have kept doing that. But again, my heart calling and mission was for our community. And so I still do athletes, professional athletes,
Right.
but that's private. And again, that's all just word of mouth. So and even in that world, so if people are listening, are like, well, how do you do that if you don't go through the traditional, like, I'm going to be a team strength and conditioning, and why are there guys like me?
Right.
Which is a whole other question. It's like, why do professional athletes have to go outside of professional organizations with millions of dollars to get help?
Right.
So I could go whole on that, but most of your guys in professional teams have their entourage of guys like myself who actually do the work to take care of them and keep them healthy and do their off-season training, all that kind of stuff, and get them ready for the season.
Right.
So again, there's a difference between that corporate political world
Right.
Versus the side kind of private world. However, you do have to have that initial interaction. You don't just walk up to a professional athlete and say, my name's Joe, let me train you. Right, there has to be some kind of relationship. For me, it was with my very first NFL guy was I trained the agent of some of the Denver Broncos, their high school kids at the time, who are now in college, University of Nebraska, and one just is transferring to another school. But anyways, he had one of the captains of the Denver Broncos. This is, gosh, I've been back in 2007 or 8, if I have to look back. His athlete, who was with the Broncos, had a really bad injury, and he wasn't getting the help he needs, so he brought him to me, and I helped him, and that's the first introduction. So you always need that foot in the door, but then you have to know your stuff, because if you know your stuff, then that guy says, Chris did a good job. He tells his next buddy, who tells his next buddy, and then that's how things proliferate.
Right.
So that's another thing too, and people, now that we have this social media world where now you've got thousands of so-called experts online, and they look good and they can look really flashy, they can even have a professional athlete or two, but I really don't care so much for the guy that has like one or two, just because, you could be the guy who just grew up with, that professional athlete.
Right.
You might have been his roommate in college.
Yeah.
And therefore maybe you got to work with him and he got to the pros, not because you were such a great trainer, but because he was just so God-given talented. He was going to go to the pros regardless. And then you're like, hey, I trained so-and-so, and now you can do your YouTube or your Instagram thing.
Right.
No, it's the guy who gets his shot, but then now has 30, 40, 50 pictures on his wall.
Right.
Because now all right, he's actually doing the job for multiple people, and they keep referring more people. That's a guy I'm going to listen to more often.
Right.
But then it's not the guy in the laboratory behind some college desk with a 6 to 10 random college students that only have mediocre athletic ability, and then they do some study just to confirm what guys that are already doing the training knew 10 years ago. So that's the hard thing about, everyone wants to know, like, what are you doing and what's the science behind it? Well, here are the scientific principles, but what we're really doing is innovation. And innovation doesn't have peer-reviewed science. Right? Because we're always on the envelope of figuring out the new and how do we get something better, or how do we do this. Yes, we're going to start with scientific sound principles, but honestly, I'd rather use common sense and then get to use it at the highest level. And if it works for one, then maybe it works for 10, and then all of a sudden now, hey, we've done this at the highest level with the top level athletes, and we can create change that is replicable and now predictable. And guess what? That's going to work for our population, not just some random study, because you can take any scientific study and support whatever. If you want to be vegan, plenty of studies to support veganism. You want to be nothing but a meat eater, plenty of studies to support that too. So it's kind of a joke now. It just takes a lot more, and that's where, again, common sense. Realizing that it's a lot more than just here's my one way of doing things, and how do we assimilate all this information while keeping really the awe and respect of how intricate the human is, how much of a miracle the human is. And if you don't have that, then you get prideful and arrogant, thinking that, I've got this all figured out. Or you stop learning. Again, for me, seeing the miracle of the human and realizing that if I had 20 lifetimes, even though if you look at my desk, my nightstand at home, there's always 8 to 10 books out. If I'm awake, I'm either working or I'm reading or I'm doing something, and I could have 20 lifetimes and still never figure it all out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which keeps me hungry to keep learning, and it also haunts me, and those two things create my sense of urgency to always keep getting better and better and better. And that's what's going to keep you, because there's a lot of people who are good, but they will go away because they stop growing, they stop learning, they stop staying hungry, and take their results seriously. Because now when you're talking about, I was fortunate. I got to help Odell Beckham Jr. get back this year. He signed the biggest wide receiver contract in the NFL history.
Yeah.
When guys are putting their faith in you to say, hey, my livelihood and millions upon millions of dollars rest on you doing a good job, you better know your stuff. You better come through, and that better scare you a little bit.
So, just really quick, since you mentioned Odell Beckham Jr., I just saw on ESPN.com he's sitting out his third game in a row with a quadriceps injury. Is that something that you are communicating with him in regards to, or working with him to try to get him back with this specific injury, or is that kind of more team related with that specific injury right now?
I'm just going to leave that one a little bit open in the sense of saying that there's a lot that goes on with that.
Okay.
There's a lot of things, and him being such a high exposure athlete, there's more to it. The short answer is I am currently not. I'm talking to him, yes. I am not hands-on with him right now. I was with him actually before the Bears game. And he played that game, and he had a fantastic game.
Right.
But since the Bears game and him now choosing to sit out, I don't know.
Oh, that's fine. I just saw it on ESPN.com before I came over, and I was like, I knew that you had worked with him, so I was just like, I just didn't know. Yeah. So that's cool.
Now, I would just say the biggest thing is that he's very smart and intelligent. And last year, and that's, in one sense, I was fortunate because if it weren't for his big injuries, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with him.
Right.
But he thought he was back, and he really tried to push because he's really the ultimate competitor. And he pushed something ahead of time, and that made him susceptible to worse injuries. And he's fought really hard to get back to where he's at this year. And so, again, there's no reason for him to not be 100%.
Right. Okay. And I know I want to be respectful to your time, so we'll kind of wrap things up here. Just kind of in closing, if you don't mind, Chris, just maybe touching a little bit on training youth. Because I know, again, kind of going back to what you mentioned earlier, kind of just being, I know I grew up kind of in the I had an awesome foundation laid for me in strength training, but then once you get into high school, it's kind of my experience, and I think for a lot of youth, especially in a smaller school, it's kind of a free-for-all. It's, kind of survival of the fittest. If you make it through the program, great, but a lot of kids I know I saw and I've heard they get injured. So just on a very basic, simple level, if you're going to start, first of all, what age do you think is an appropriate age to start a child strength training, or, air squats and just training without any weights or resistance or anything like that? And then second of all, and we'll end it with that, just kind of like, what are some basic movements, or what direction would you want to take somebody if they're just starting off as a young kid training?
Yeah, so the first question that you get a lot is when is it okay to start weight training? In which I typically respond when a little kid jumps out of a tree at 6 years old, and he can literally jump out of the tree twice his height, and he doesn't worry about blowing out his ACL or hurting his back. How much force do you really think he's absorbing from that kind of height, right? If I took, before we had our turf area in the gym here, I actually had a whole parkour gym, and that's a whole other side story of why we had that. But, we'd watch little kids jumping off, I think boxes twice their height,
right,
landing like it was nothing. Yet if I took any professional athlete and I put them on a box even similar to their height and said, hey, you know what, day one, I want you to just jump off. I want to see what's the quality of your landing. They'd be like, hey, man, no way. I'm going to hurt myself. Which really shows the lackluster training we get as we get older. Even if you account for the variance in, increased body weight and all of that, those little kids are still producing pound for pound a lot more force. It's not really a good idea sorry, we just got a little interrupted there.
It's okay.
But sorry. The ultimate response is that those kids are already weight training, right? If you're doing a push-up, that's still weight training. If you're doing an air squat, it's still weight training. What we're talking about is a better way of looking at it is are you able to move correctly, maintain position, fire muscles in the correct sequence to therefore absorb force correctly in whatever you're doing, whether it's jumping and landing, whether it's bench pressing, squatting, whether it's traditional weight training, whether it's out on the field. So if you were out playing basketball and you're jumping up and down, guess what? You're doing some plyometric training. Right? However, understand anything in a gym one exercise in and of itself, if you say, hey, I want to get really good at squats, so you go to the gym and every day you squat, you will develop a better motor pattern, hopefully, of squatting. But the one exercise by itself creates imbalance. Just like if I throw a baseball every single day, and that's all I ever do, I create imbalance.
Right.
If I swing a golf club, I create imbalance. If I go bench press, I create imbalance. So it's about how does the human body work correctly. So we're born closer with balance. You know, that's why we talk about it. And yes, we can get into the biomechanics of, well, that little baby that's squatting correctly doesn't have the same torso and his head's bigger and all that. But you can still squat correctly. Now, are your knees going to travel further forward? Are you going to have other things because of center of gravity? Yes. But what I'm looking at is the fact that that kid that's squatting didn't have to be taught how to squat, and the relative muscular balance in how the agonist and antagonist, let's say quad hamstring, it's firing with a more appropriate response. So when that kid squats down, forget about the leverages and the center of gravity. The kid's quadricep is lengthening and the hamstring is contracting the way it should. However, we go from being kids that are playing and doing all sorts of fun stuff, crawling around, to then we throw them in school so they're sitting all day long, to then the activities they choose to do repeatedly, run, jump, right, play basketball. They're going to now continue to develop quad strength, but we don't have the equal amount of time developing hamstring strength, glute activation. So not only do you have a physical deficit, but then it also changes the motor pattern. So now what happens is we have kids who can no longer squat. So here's a common thing. People say, hey, let me see you air squat. And they squat down. As they start to get close to parallel, they start to fold over at the waist because they start to fall backwards, because they're no longer pulling with those hamstrings and lengthening the quad. They're actually resisting the ground, which is tightening up the quad, which in essence has changed them from doing a leg curl to a leg extension, which is throwing them backwards. So the only way to not fall down is to either stop squatting or to lean forward. And now we get them into high school because we realize, hey, as a kid we have, we'll say, mobility, but then we don't have a lot of absolute strength. So we really focus on absolute strength. We say we increase strength with loads, we put a bar on their back, but they've already now developed that leg extension as opposed to leg curl motor pattern, and that gets accentuated even more under load, which is just a stress to the body. So when they start having these ACL injuries, and they're having them at younger ages, is it the weight training's fault, or is it the fact that we didn't develop them correctly, and then our typical weight training is really happening from guys that were, this is how I grew up, so I'm going to regurgitate that. Again, go back to common sense, right? And this is nothing against, I mean, our high school coaches and stuff, you know, they can have great hearts, great servants, but they spend a fraction of their time learning about weight training as opposed to like what I do, where it's my full-time life, right? I would never go in there and even say, you know what, let me just revamp all of your football plays. No, they spend more time on that, and they're still doing their teaching and other stuff, and they're still part-time football coaches. So if they're part-time football coaches, they're only even quarter-time or less strength and conditioning coaches. And that's what most of our high school, I mean, we're not talking about Dallas, Texas, right? They're exceptions. And then unfortunately, our collegiate programs, even the pros, it's just, all this stuff gets accentuated. Which is, again, why the pros still have to go outside the organization and come to guys like me. And again, what's my thing? Wasn't at first strength and conditioning, well, it was, but it was really injury related. It was, this is the same kind of junk that led to my injuries, and I have to figure out what really works. So that's why we change. We have to go back to being a kid again, in the sense of we have to regain those motor patterns. We have to regain the appropriate balance and how the body works. Traditional bodybuilding for performance isn't right. All the sea of machines in your lifetime and your 24-hour fitnesses aren't helping athletic performance unless you want to play football sitting in a chair, right? It just is not how the human works. There's a time and place. And again, if you want to be a bodybuilder, okay, nothing wrong with that per se, but then don't complain when you want to go play basketball and you blow out your knee. So the Soviets, if you want to actually have a model, from about, birth until about 5-6 years old, kids were routinely just playing. play sports, do all sorts of different little things. And then the first kind of true sports they were doing were more gymnastics and track and field. Because in your gymnastics type of environment, you're learning kinesthetic awareness, you're learning coordination. Again, when you climb a rope, is that weight training? Of course it's weight training. Most people would say it's much harder to climb a rope than to go to a lat pull machine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So forget about weight training, right? Anything with resistance, whether it's your body weight times the force of gravity, like in a plyometric sense, or you jumping up and down, or you applying some other load, like gravity, like pulling up on a rope, or pushing against gravity with a barbell, that's all weight training.
Right.
However, it's more of kinesthetic awareness, quadruped movement, left-right brain connection. I wish I would have gone back. So like one sport I didn't really play was basketball. Not that I cared to excel in basketball, but I wish I would have spent more time developing my offhand so I could dribble equally with just the same amount of ease. Because I do believe that gives you a form of athleticism that can still translate to other sport. Same thing of, I played soccer young, but then I gave up soccer for football in about 4th grade. So after that, I never really played soccer. So again, the dexterity of kicking, passing with your feet, a different type of motor pattern, a different type of athleticism. So we have a problem now that everyone wants to be so special. I call it the Tiger Woods syndrome. It's throw a golf club in their hand, swing away. You can get really good at golf, but now look what happened to Tiger's back. It's even amazing he's even playing this year, but he'll still, I don't think he'll ever be his same, like the pinnacle of where he was, because he never trained as an athlete. He trained as a golfer. Big distinction.
Right.
So with kids, let them play. Let them develop much more motor patterns, and then be cognizant of how does our natural environment, like sitting in chairs, sitting at school, we're taking away recess playgrounds. So that's another little tidbit. I mean, so in the Soviet education and young kids, they only ever sat for 45 minutes before they would go and do even 5 minutes of like quote unquote recess.
Right.
Because they understood the value of the physical side and to get them out of chairs, but also just attention span. Right? So that's a whole other conversation. Building resiliency in kids. Again, just the coddling. We talked a little bit about that before. Not coddling our kids and doing all this other stuff, or just trying to throw them into skill acquisition so quickly. Now, if you do that to a point, now right around 9 to 12 is where they would start to figure out just as much, not physically, but also psychologically, where do kids best fit? Because you could have a kid that, let's say a kid is a great wrestler, but maybe psychologically he does not want to be in an individual sport, and he freezes one-on-one. Well, he can take those same skills if he's athletic as a wrestler and now become a great middle linebacker. Now he's on a team sport, let's say, and he thrives. So you're looking at psychological factors. You're looking at, again, I always kind of joke that you don't choose sport, the sport kind of chooses you. Shaquille O'Neal was never going to be a horse jockey, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Now, there could be other things that you can translate, but a lot of times the sport is going to be dictated by who you are, just by the nature of sport. I've got proportionally really long legs and a short torso. I could sprint. I have better upper body strength. So I'm not built to be a world-class squatter. Doesn't mean I can't squat, but I have to take it under considerations. But as far as being world-class, would never be that. However, one sport that I missed that I probably could have really excelled at would be pole vaulting. Because I've got a pole vaulter's build and the attributes of a pole vaulter. Now, if I were in the Soviet model, they probably would have seen something like that, and I could have started to gear in my fundamental training towards that. So then, from about 12 to 18 is where you really start to specialize. Until then, 18 into your 20s is when you're going to your professional sports, or if you were in the Eastern Bloc, you would go into Olympics. So that's kind of their progression as sport, and the weight training comes in. Now you can start a little kid in their sport acquisition at that young age. You can start with a broom handle and work on a clean and jerk technique if you really wanted that. The problem now in America is that we don't start doing cleans and jerks until they're in high school, maybe, but then it's already, they don't have the motor pattern. It's a huge learning curve. Kids just throw up the weight. They don't get good coaching. Then they're killing themselves. We see kids go into college programs and they'll spend 4 years doing Olympic lifts because their strength coach says, I want them to become more powerful, but they waste all this time. kids get injured when you could do the same thing by making them freakishly strong and using plyometrics to get the exact same, if not better, output at a lower risk of injury. Because unless they're actually going to go to the Olympics in Olympic weightlifting, there's really no point.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that there's not a benefit to Olympic lifts and are they highly athletic, but you have to think, what's the trade-off? Now, if you take kids at a young age and you actually start to work on the motor pattern and treat it as if it's its own sport, as opposed to calling it weight training, because again, weight training is to enhance athleticism. Sport is about developing a motor pattern. A squat, a bench, an Olympic lift, as clean as snatch, those are motor patterns in and of themselves. And again, if you just focus on the motor pattern, you can get good at the movement, but you can also create imbalance. Right. And that's why I differentiate. If someone goes to the gym and only does Olympic lifts, I would not say they're training. They are practicing a skill.
Right.
And in that practice of skill, they're creating imbalance. So therefore, if there comes to be a point where if they want to keep getting better, now they have to get physically stronger working on their weaknesses and set aside the Olympic lifts for a time and come back to them. So same thing, if you want to get good at any one thing, you have to work on both the motor pattern, but if you set a foundation of athleticism first, the motor patterns can be more readily learned because you've set that neural pathway, but you always train to work on your weaknesses, and that's how you stay healthy. Again,
cool.
those are the stages, and that's kind of the bigger mindset of how you go about doing it.
That's great. Thank you. This is last question, if you don't mind me asking. Is there a favorite Bible verse that you have? Because I know you have a Bible on your desk and everything, and just wanted to see if there's something out there that maybe motivates you, or maybe a verse that kind of is on your heart all the time that you kind of just lean on, something like that.
Wow. You know, I know a lot of people have their lifelong. I don't really have I would say a lifelong. Most Bible verses for me tend to be seasonal with what I'm currently going through in life or something.
Maybe a favorite book or something?
Well, I mean, I can answer both. I would say my current favorite book is probably Resilience. Both in the phase of life I'm at, and I'm making it required reading for my staff. Just that concept of what goes into resiliency, I think is huge for everybody. So Resilience is a great book right now that I'm recommending. But Bible verses, I would say, here's like the load. Right now I would say I'm in a lot of 1 John. Cool. God is love, and really, if you want to summarize the entire Bible, Jesus did it in two commandments: love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So it really comes down to love, and how do we learn how to love? How do we become better at love, and realizing that? And that's the other thing that gets thrown around in America. We have one word for love. Right. Greeks had 4 different words for love. So different concepts from, the ergos, our more erotic eros love, to brotherly Philadelphia, philos, to, our agape, our self-sacrificial, so that we can really learn to die to ourselves. Right. So really anything, one of my old mentors long time ago in college, and actually the gentleman who married us, I just remember that when people talk about favorite verses, he did have a favorite verse, and that was, love covers a multitude of sins. He always clung to that. And, it's funny, as I get older, and as you get older, hopefully you realize how many more mistakes we make, how much we do need a Savior. Right. It really, people, as they get older, tend to do one of two things. They either get more prideful and arrogant and more hard-hearted, or they become more broken and humble, realizing how much, you can't be a perfect parent, you can't be a perfect friend, and you realize our need, and therefore it turns from a lot of judgment towards realizing that if I'm judged, that really sucks. Right. And when you start to get older and you face that, it's a lot better to rest. And so now, all these years later, I look back to my old mentor, and it is probably becoming much more of my life verse, if you will. Love covers a multitude of sins. Cool.
Thanks for sharing that. Is social media, if you want to share with your social media, plug away or anything like that? If website.
Sure. If anyone wants to look us up, DynamisAthlete.com, Dynamis ARP. So we have both our Dynamis Athlete, which is a little bit more of our educational videos. Same thing on our Instagram. We both have the Dynamis Athlete and Dynamis ARP, and ARP is Accelerated Recovery and Performance. So DynamisARP.com, DynamisAthlete.com, as well as those same two on Instagram are the best ways to check us out.
Okay, cool. And I just want to thank you, Chris, for your time today and for just kind of sharing your heart and what you're doing here at your gym. So appreciate the time. And listeners, I just want to thank you for tuning in today. Definitely got a wealth of knowledge from Chris, and so hopefully you can dissect some of that and apply that to your life. If you guys want to reach out to me, Facebook, Quentin Vars, Instagram at 127fit, and just again, thanks for hanging out with us. I'm open to any feedback, any guests or anything like that out here in the Colorado Springs, Denver area that you think might be a good guest for the podcast. Just let me know, and hopefully you guys have a Merry Christmas. If some of you school teachers out there listening are on break, enjoy your break, and we will end with Proverbs 24:10. If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. I'll catch you guys later.